What is up with all these EMP comments on all of our videos that have anything tech related?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's just like one dude making all the comments and he's in his mom's basement or something. I don't know.
Oh, e-bikes? Oh yeah, they're completely useless once a coronal mass ejection hits the earth, you morons. Unprepared. Hashtag. Night vision? More like no vision. A single nuke detonated in the atmosphere and you just lost 10 grand. Posers. Oh yeah, cool thermal optics. Too bad they're useless once an EMP hits. Idiots. These idiots. Hollow sun thermal red dots? Completely worthless once an electromagnetic pulse fries the circuitry. Hashtag iron sights.
There is a certain kind of person that always makes it a point to leave a comment on YouTube channels about how whatever it is that you're doing is stupid and dumb and worthless and unrealistic, all because actually Muh EMP. And that kind of person is someone that I actually agree with. Now, I am not an EMP expert. I'm not a scientist. I'm pretty sure I don't have to convince you guys of that. But the idea that there's this technological trump card out there that could render our entire way of life and all of our technology, the technology that we love and use on this channel all the time, completely inert and useless, has been like a splinter in my mind for years. It's one of those rabbit holes I've just never had the time to go down until this week, whenever Josh was out of town and we decided, hey, let's get wild with the content. The problem is most of the information out there is actually very confusing. It's scattered about, it's not consolidated. There's a lot of it and it's very weird and boring. So why are we even talking about this boring, weird, niche, unrealistic topic? Well, because most guys like me, whose goals in life are trad wife, lots of kids, farmland, off-grid, and a nuclear EMP-proof underground bunker with plenty of food and water and entertainment for years that can Optimus Prime into a rocket ship, take us up into outer space, slingshot around a black hole to an Earth 2.0 that we populate and terraform for the Emperor, I really wanted to find out if EMP protection should actually be on the priority list or not. And here's what I found. Well, compared to food and water and ammo and comms and community building, no, not really. But there is something there to talk about. You see, an electromagnetic pulse weapon is considered a HILF event. I'm sure you guys are gonna have a ton of fun in the comment section with that acronym. I'll just let you have it. HILF means high impact, low frequency. In other words, it's not very likely to happen, but if it did, its impact would be huge and catastrophic. Very similar to what you might read about in the book, fictional book, 1 Second After, which several SMEs in this field have actually referenced as being relatively realistic as to how it would go down. Homeland Security even estimates that between 50 and 90% of our population in the United States would die within the first year of a major EMP attack. But how would that actually play out, and what can you even do about it? So when I went down the rabbit hole, I watched hours and hours of videos from subject matter experts on this exact topic. I read over 1,500 pages of official reports and white paper documents from lead agencies, engineers, electricians, disaster management specialists, and scientists, all so I could more fully understand the threat and if it's even worth us trying to do anything about it. I have found that there are things you can do about it, even on a blue-collar budget, that can set you and your family and your community up for success if something like this were to happen and all of our tech and our entire way of life went away just like that. But first we have to get on the same page. Let's talk about how EMPs actually work, what they would and would not affect, and then we'll jump into what you can do about it on a budget. Before we move on, I gotta thank a couple sponsors because they make content like this free for you guys. Normally YouTube likes to demonetize us, so these sponsors really keep us going. One of them is Modlite. Modlite is my favorite weapon light company. They make some of the best high lumen, high candela, high performance products in the game. I just picked up one of their new pistol lights, which is a massive improvement over the other one. I still like their old one too, but this thing is actually pretty cool. It's gonna be going on one of my pistols very soon. The second one though is Steel Industries. Now, we're talking about EMPs, so I have a little spoiler for you. You're probably going to want to keep your nods in a Faraday bag because they are susceptible to EMPs. We'll talk more about that later. But if you are looking to get into the night vision game, in my opinion, Steel Industries is probably one of the best companies out there that you can get stuff from. It's the one that I prefer. It's the one that I've purchased things from personally. And they have incredible customer service, ton of great knowledge, and their content's also pretty sick as well. Link in the description also for a discount. And the final one is Avon. So When we hooked up with Avon for the first time, we made this wild video about how to use a gas mask, and most people don't know how to use one properly, and they gave us a ton of resources and let us talk to their subject matter experts to really learn as much as possible, as much as we could, about how to properly use and make the most out of a gas mask and why a civilian would even need one in the first place. So these guys make the only NIJ US made gas masks in the game. They also make a ton of other protective gear, but this is one of my personal favorites. It's the Bulldog version. I've also got the mic on the front of it, which makes it a lot easier to talk through. So if you are interested in gas masks, you can't go wrong with Avon protection. In my opinion, they are the best, and there's a lot of other good options out there. I'm not poo-pooing anybody else, but these are the guys I choose, and they make content like this possible, and we are stoked to have sponsors like these guys. Let's get back to it. Okay, so first things first, what is an EMP? Well, there's actually two different types. There's natural and there's man-made. We're out here in nature right now.
Nature is one of the neatest things on this planet.
Out here in the 95-degree weather in Tennessee, even though it feels like the surface of the sun, which is actually kind of perfect because the first kind does come from the sun. It is solar. It's called a coronal mass ejection, or a CME for short. It's when charged plasma is released from the sun and washes over the earth. It's like a swell of voltage that pressurizes itself into very long conductors. In other words, like very, very long lines of power, if you want to really simplify it. And what does it affect? Well, the entire grid. So industrial controllers, SCADA systems, power distribution transformers, the cell network, water plants, you name it, all the big things that we rely on for our way of life, it affects all of those. The last large CME was in the 1800s. It was called the Carrington event, and it affected, granted there wasn't a lot of electricity back then, but there was the telegraph system, and it affected the telegraph system all across the United States. There was even reports of there being electrical fires because of it. So you can imagine how catastrophic it would be today with everything basically running off of electric. It's important to note that EMPs are kind of categorized in three different ways: E3, E2, and E1. And we'll cover all of that throughout this video, but this particular effect with the CMEs is categorized as an E3 event, or an E3 effect. And it basically, again, just handles the grid, the very long conductors, and anything attached to that grid. So your home, like, if the grid is down, your home is affected because it can travel through all those wires straight into your home, into your breaker box, and anything that is connected to that breaker box in your home, your appliances, your refrigerator, your microwave, your oven, your HVAC system, no AC, all of that is affected. Your computer, which is plugged into the wall, sorry, your surge protector right there, your cheap Amazon surge protector, not gonna work. It's important to note that the US power grid consists of 5 major interconnects. These are basically energy or electricity distribution hubs. They're huge, they're massive, all of your local stuff relies on them, and they even span into other parts of North America. And if any one of those gets hit, there's gonna be a major, major problem. People's way of life are gonna be completely shattered, and you can't just order a new part to fix those things. Some of those things are the size of small buildings. Some of that equipment is, and it takes months, if not years, to get replacement parts or to get replacement units to fix that. Taking into consideration like all the other things that are gonna be messed up as well, you know, just because you fix one of those, it doesn't just fix all the other problems and all the other stations and all the other homes and all the appliances in the home. You're starting to see the compound effects of something like an E3. This is not a solar flare. This is not a sunspot or anything like that. This is much, much more broad and powerful. And there are some things that are still safe. Like, for example, all of your freestanding electronics, your laptop, if it's not plugged in, your cell phone, even though the cell towers will be affected, all of that is still okay. It's unaffected. Your vehicles will be fine unless you have a Tesla and you have it plugged in. It's not gonna matter. If you are ahead of the game and you have solar power, you're probably just fine unless your solar power is also feeding into the grid and you're one of those guys who's actually making money generating more power than you consume. I'm kind of jealous of you, but at the same time, if you don't have EMP protection on that whole setup, ooh, it's gonna be bad. If you think that's bad, I hate to break it to you, but it gets worse. Now, the worst option is actually a nuclear EMP. That is the mecca of all EMPs. And basically it's just a nuclear warhead that is set off, and the byproduct is an EMP effect, an electromagnetic pulse that shoots out from the source. Now, this is not technically a bomb that you would, hit a city with. Yes, there would still be an effect. How this would actually be used is to detonate it at altitude above the Earth, above like North America, so to speak. So this would be detonated about 100 to 300 miles in altitude or higher. So literally just taking a nuke up into space, setting it off, and the EMP effects would wash out over the Earth. Now, just for reference, astronauts only have to travel about 62 to 63 miles to get out of Earth and to get into outer space. So this is so high up, you would likely never see it, you would never feel it. All of a sudden, everything would just shut down. Now, this type of EMP actually is way worse than a coronal mass ejection because it does everything a CME does with those E3 effects, plus E2 and E1 effects. E2 is faster than an E3, it's like a lightning strike time, but an E1 is basically instant, and it affects everything else beyond the grid, like your handheld devices, your phones, your radios, even your vehicles. Now, how do we know this to be true? Well, we've done some testing. In 1962, during the US Starfish Prime event, which was the largest nuclear test the US has ever done in space, it generated an EMP of 5,600 volts per meter that affected over 800 miles. And even the Soviet Union's test over Kazakhstan generated a 7,500 to 10,000 volts per meter effect. So it's widely accepted that nuclear EMPs, even with old school second generation nukes, can generate 50,000 volts per meter, which is insane and why it's so destructive. So what would the effects be? Well, it depends on the yield of the warhead. For example, a B-41 25 megaton will have a greater impact than a smaller, yet still devastating 400 kiloton B-61 11. The working theory at the moment is that a 10 megaton nuke detonated at 200 miles above the United States would affect everyone in the country and even other parts of North America. It's a pretty big deal. Now, this E1 effect, it's a very, very brief pulse. It's super fast. It's voltage being pressurized super fast into anything that can conduct it. It's extremely high energy, extremely fast pressurized. This is what cooks everything. It will affect freestanding electronics, for any kind of freestanding circuit, vehicle, planes, boats. It's even going to affect the satellites in orbit around the area where it's detonated. Now, one of the things I'm most concerned about is what would happen to the vehicles. Well, there has been some testing, although it's somewhat minimal, done on cars that show that modern cars, basically anything made since the mid-1980s, is going to get affected. And if you're an EMP denier, imagine if even only like 10% of the vehicles are affected. It would completely cripple the transportation and emergency response. Cars would crash, they'd stall. If any emergency response vehicles survive, they wouldn't even be able to navigate the clogged roadways to get people in time to help. Then add on the fact that modern fuel pumps stopped working and shipping would shut down and grocery stores would stop getting deliveries and the SCADA systems that control our water distribution aren't hardened enough. You start to see where the 50 to 90% statistic that we mentioned earlier of deaths of people in America would happen. Not to mention anything still working would probably be attempted to be commandeered by the government, and that wouldn't go well either. But what specifically would be damaged in an EMP that had, the E1 effect? Well, I had a chance to interview a subject matter expert on this, Dr. Arthur Bradley. You may have seen him on YouTube with some of his educational material and some of his testing that he's published here on YouTube at EMP Doctor. It's an incredible resource. I definitely suggest you go down that rabbit hole. Hours and hours of data and video footage of this stuff. One of the things that he said that I have heard other SMEs talk about is it's likely that not absolutely everything, all of your devices, all of your vehicles, they're not all just going to die across America. But even if only 10%, again, going back to that 10%, became inoperable, that's still a big deal. Think about 10% of the things in your home not working all of a sudden, that's still a big deal. But the broader issue here is that E3 effect that can only occur on long lines, that affects the power grid and all the infrastructure that we need for those devices to work, or anything with an antenna. When those are damaged, then your devices basically become useless. But in terms of devices themselves, here is kind of like what would be affected. Let's talk about medical devices. Pacemakers, hearing aids, possible, but actually low likelihood because of how tiny the processor, like little microprocessors, are inside of them. And that's kind of a rule that you need to remember, is the smaller something is, and if it doesn't have an antenna on it, the less likely it is to be affected by something like an E1. Anything with an antenna, radios, cell phones, laptops, smartwatches, GPS, and especially with laptops, even freestanding, they can be affected, though likely, if there was any effects, it may not be catastrophic. You could just turn them back on. But if it's plugged in, then you also get that E3 effect that is affecting everything connected to the grid, which your laptop would be if it was plugged into the wall, which is plugged into your breaker box, which is plugged into the big boy. But what about our red dots? Like, because again, you're on this channel, you're thinking about guns, I get it, I'm the same way. So optics can be affected, though again, going back to how small the processors are, or how small the microprocessors are in those things, it's unlikely they'll be affected on a grand scale. They can be though. The point here is also that there's not a lot of testing on this stuff, like it's almost non-existent. But there are some things that you can do to add shielding to those smaller items like red dots, your EOTechs, even your thermal devices, and night vision, of course. Also, any sort of electronic tool that you have that has a microprocessor or a diode in it, which is a lot of them. Again, it goes back to size. It's unlikely that they'll all be affected, but it is possible. But portable generators, and even solar generators, can be affected by this. So everything can be affected, like there's no way around it. But the chances of it being affected, I think, aren't as great as what most people think and what most people say, what most people type in the comment section. If you have batteries out, batteries are not going to be affected. Also, removing your batteries from these devices basically makes no difference whatsoever. If they're turned on, turned off, it doesn't matter. That's not how an EMP works. If you do have the batteries with that you plug in and actively charge, those can be affected. And also, again, vehicles without modern electronics, usually before the mid-1980s. I'm constantly on Facebook Marketplace trying to find one just to buy cheap and just because, you know, that's that prepper in me. I gotta do it. But also like heavy duty motors, things that don't have a ton of electronics or even any in them at all, it's not gonna be affected. Oh, but what about our e-bikes? Yeah, there's a pretty good chance those are gonna be protected, and there's not a lot of devices other than just shielding them with, you know, EMP proof material, which is super expensive. So our e-bikes that's a big question mark right now. I'm kind of scared about it. We'll get back to you on that.
Unprepared, hashtag.
But at this point, you're probably already thinking, okay, you have gone down this massive rabbit hole of what ifs, Drew. And you're right, I have. I told you from the get-go, that's what I'm doing. Like, I'm having fun with it. So what is the likelihood of an EMP going off, of an actual nuclear detonated EMP at altitude? Well, it's pretty low. Again, this is a high impact, low frequency event, but in a lot of war games, EMPs are often used to preempt a mainland invasion or even to drop an actual nuke onto, you know, a target. Just to disrupt and cripple a city or nation without the widespread damage and the PR nightmare that an actual nuclear bomb would have, and without the effects of radiation. That's one thing to consider, is that when a nuclear warhead is detonated above Earth's atmosphere, like 100, 200, 300 miles up, the radiation washes out over the Earth before it would ever touch you or me. That's not the point of weapons like this. And you should know that there are a lot of nations besides us that have this technology. Russia, China, North Korea, there's many others. They're all working on it. You can read the reports for yourself. So a lot of our enemies have this technology. Whether or not they can deploy it is not always known. Now, I know someone's going to say this, it's illegal to have nuclear weapons in space. When has something illegal ever stopped a government? Never. But what about non-nuclear options? Is there anything out there that can fit in a suitcase, or it's just like a normal bomb that emits an EMP, or a direct energy weapon of some sort? Yeah, there absolutely are. EMPs can also be generated by portable high-power electromagnetic devices. A lot of these are known as RFWs, or radio frequency weapons, and high-power microwaves, HPM, if you're looking this stuff up. And that can create E1 effects up to several miles. But these are even less common than CMEs or high-altitude EMPs. One thing to note is that in 2001, the DoD recruited a scientist to build up an HMP, and did so for under, I think, like $2,000, with over-the-counter commercially available parts, small enough to go in a USPS box or stash in a vehicle. So the tech does exist. Even China supplies American citizens with little tiny EMP pulsar devices. You can get them on. I don't think we can say where we get them from, but you can get them, and you can use those things to shut down small devices if you're in range of them. And of course, it's very illegal, so don't don't like go and do that, please. And certainly, yeah, just don't tell anybody you heard that here. So now that I've completely fearmongered you into paying attention, which apparently, according to some comments, is basically anything that we do is fearmongering, and that's okay, because I guess when you talk about reality, that's scary, because reality can be scary. But let's go talk about some things that you can actually do to mitigate the effects of an EMP for your devices, your home, and especially your vehicle. Now I know what you're thinking, protecting all of my stuff, it's gonna cost a lot of money, so what should I prioritize? You'd be right, if you try to protect everything, it's gonna cost you an arm and a leg. Like, if you have the budget for it, by all means go for it, but what I'm really looking for here is the home, the vehicle, and our devices. Which one of those is most important? Well, for me, I decided it was going to be my vehicle, and here's why. You see, protecting your home requires like a full home protection plan. It's not as simple as just installing a surge protector for your house. If the grid is down, you're gonna have to have a generator. That generator also needs to be shielded and protected from an EMP. And then you have to figure out a way to fuel that generator. But if no fuel pumps are working anymore, and if you didn't protect your vehicle also, how are you gonna get to it? How are you gonna pump it?
It ain't got no gas in it.
I think you start to see where that becomes a problem unless you have the budget and the time to really kick it up to that notch. Let's say you have solar, for example. Well, those controllers still have to be shielded and protected as well. And it's a massive jump financially to protect all of those assets. And I get it, it's still ideal. I would still love to do that, but we're not talking about everything that you should do here today. We're talking about what is an easy first step. Well, one easy first step is your devices. Faraday bags and Faraday cages have worked great for years. You can buy, there's plenty of different companies that make very good ones. You can find all kinds of DIY options on YouTube, people who have done them, tested them, they worked well. I'm not gonna go down that because that information is already very available. I will say there's certain things I do keep in my Faraday bags: laptop, an extra phone. I keep a battery bank, like a solar rechargeable battery bank, so I can power other devices. Because again, maybe not all of my devices die, but if I don't have power to my house, well, they could still be useful if I had a way to charge them and recharge them. Also keep an extra radio in there with the antenna detached. Actually 2 radios, one in one bag and one in the other. And then my very valuables like night vision, thermal, an extra set of optic is like a cheap optic that I threw in there just so I'd have one. Those are the kinds of things I'm putting in a Faraday bag. So this is why I've chosen to prioritize protecting our vehicles, or at least mitigating the risk to our vehicles. Even if it's not 100%, every vehicle is gonna die, I still would like to be able to be mobile because mobility is life. And if I was ever in an emergency situation, and even if the roads were clogged, even if fuel wasn't, if I couldn't pump any more fuel, being able to get one emergency trip in because I had a vehicle when no one else did, that's a huge asset that I think we all take for granted. And the best part is it's actually way cheaper than I expected to be able to protect a vehicle, or at least to mitigate that risk. And you're gonna hear me say that often in this next little bit, because when you're talking about EMPs, you're mostly talking about theory. There have been plenty of tests done, but not everything has been figured out. In fact, even the EMP Commission, who were basically tasked to figure out what would an EMP's effects be on a vehicle, even they didn't have conclusive data. They only had like 55 cars. The majority of them were affected in some way. Some of them, it was just some like minor issues with the electronics. A couple of them stalled out. A couple of them had some serious damage, but even they couldn't replicate exactly what would happen during a full-scale, massively powerful EMP strike. So this is something to consider when you're looking at this stuff. I have a pretty good radar as far as products that are completely bogus, and I've seen a lot of EMP stuff guarantee 100% this is gonna shield your stuff, this is gonna protect your devices, this is gonna protect your car. And anytime I see a 100% guarantee with anything related to an EMP, I'm immediately like, nope. No thank you. I will go and I will find companies and products that show their testing and show their results, and that's what I base my purchasing decision on. So how do you protect your vehicle from an EMP? Well, there's 2 main options: shielding and surge protection, or transient protection. Shielding is very, very effective, though it is very, very expensive. It would cost a lot of money to build an EMP-proof cloth and put it around this vehicle. And also, if I'm out driving it, Well, I can't drive it with that thing on, so it's only useful when when the vehicle's in storage, and again, it's very expensive. The other option, which is the option that I have found to be kind of the coolest and the one that makes the most sense to me, is transient surge protection. And you know what a surge protector does. Transient suppression basically just lowers down or sucks out the energy that's trying to like force its way into your vehicle. Transient suppression devices, or these like micro surge protectors, they're best used in quantity and they're best used in a variety of different ways. Like for example, we just did a water video. One of the big things that we talked about there is how if you're trying to treat dirty water, never treat it the same way twice. In other words, don't use 2 different chemical agents to treat your water. Filter it and then use a chemical. Like you want to mix and match different methods, and that's what transient suppression kind of does, because there's a variety of ways that you can suppress that unwanted voltage through your vehicle and your electronics. So devices like that for vehicles are actually pretty affordable. They're actually pretty cheap, and they buy down your risk. They mitigate that risk, which is what we're talking about here. They can get expensive. I'm going to show you both options. I've installed some stuff here on this FJ, and I've installed some stuff over on my wife's van. That's my incog vehicle, and I'm going to show you what I've done with both of them. So the first one, this is actually a very affordable option. It's called a transient reducing auxiliary plug. I know it looks kind of cheap, it looks kind of simple, but all the testing that I saw that had been done on these things, these are created also by the SME that I referenced earlier, Dr. Arthur Bradley. Everything that I've seen about these tend to work pretty well. Here's what happens when an EMP hits your car. Whatever direction it comes in, it's constantly looking for places to surge voltage into. It's trying to pressurize this voltage into all the different electronics in your car, and any sort of open port is an easy access for that energy. So being able to plug ports is a great way to do this. So you're essentially plugging up the holes in your vehicle. Now there's other parts of your vehicle that are going to be exposed. Your vehicle also has just some natural shielding depending on what kind of vehicle you have. But again, you are mitigating the risk. You're buying down all the ways that your vehicle can be affected. So these little simple traps are nice. You can also get like the splitter if you want to be able to charge your phone at the same time, and you can plug this into one of the splitters and your charging device into the other, no big deal. But again, that's pretty simple. Moving back here to the back, we've got another option, which is actually pretty cool, and you can use this on a variety of things, is one that just plugs in like normal. And these work well for generators also, so if you want to plug one of these into a generator, it has the same effect. These will not work well in your home. They're basically not going to do anything for any sort of surge that comes into your house. But I have an AC outlet back here in the FJ, so I put that in, and there we have 2 options. Now if you want to kick it up to level 3, you can add yet another trap device in your ODB port. Oh, OBD port, thank you. The thing's not useful for anything, basically, at least not to me. I know some people love them, but I never use it. But yeah, it just simply plugs in there. Again, yet another place that can suppress any sort of transient power that's trying to push its way through your vehicle. Pretty cool little option. And then moving around to the battery. Now I know what you may be thinking, how is your battery going to be affected by an EMP? It's got chemical properties in it. There's no chips or anything in there. That's true, but in all the testing that I've seen, the battery has still been affected, and the battery is still very much the heart. Well, I guess the engine's the heart of your vehicle. The battery is kind of like, I guess it's food. I don't know, there's 2 different fuel sources. I didn't think about this analogy very much. It was a super simple install. You basically just disconnect, obviously have your vehicle turned off and disconnect your stuff, right? Like, don't get shocked. Positive terminal, negative terminal, and you're good to go. Now we're adding in layers. Each one of these suppresses, I think, 5,000 volts of unwanted energy. So, you've already knocked it down. If you've done these 3 things, you've already knocked it down by at least 20,000, which is awesome. And also you should remember that most cars have kind of like a limit. They can take more than what it's designed for before things start going truly wrong. So you're already getting from, like, if an EMP does 50,000 volts per meter of energy, you're already starting to like whittle that down as to the effects that your car would have. One more option, which is actually relatively inexpensive as well, are high saturation ferrites. Not just any ferrite, but high saturation ones, because you want to draw as much of that unwanted energy away from what is going on in the cables as much as possible. Let me show you what that looks like. One thing to note is it's okay for the ferrite to be too large. There's actually like that can't happen. You can double it up. In other words, you can wrap it around twice and that's fine, but you just don't want the ferrite to be too small. It's okay if the wire is not making total contact on the ferrite all the way around. That's not a big deal. Just get it in the right place, tape it down as best as you can so it doesn't like rattle or come loose, and you're good to go. But let's go check out the beefy big boy option, and this one is more expensive. All right, so in the van, which is gonna be driving around most of the time when my wife and kids are out and about and I'm making videos in my basement with Nick.
Okay.
This is called the DEFCON vehicle kit, and this is 400 times, this can handle 400 times more energy than those trap devices. So it's very, very comprehensive. We'll just put it that way. So, and it too is a simple install once you figure out where to place it in the vehicle. You obviously don't want it to interfere with your car hood, your truck hood coming down. There's a lot of devices like this on the market. This one, from all of my studies, performs very, very well. And from all the tests that I've seen Dr. Bradley do on it, it does very well. You can also get something like this for your home. It's the same style, same design. This one obviously does not work on your breaker box or your home. This is vehicle specific. And it's a pretty simple install. Finding the right spot, has plenty of cable so you can stretch it halfway across your vehicle if you need to, which is what I liked because I did not have a lot of space that I could put this in this vehicle. The FJ is even worse. There's no spare space in there. I have seen guys zip tie these or Velcro plus zip tie them to different spots under the hood, and it works well. For me, I happened to find a non-important piece of metal, and it's all important, but I could drill into it without there being any damage and hold this securely in here. With the vehicle off, of course, I ran my ground wire over here that's connected to the ground for, you know, the rest of the vehicle and the battery. And then of course, positive and negative leads, you just clamp down just like you normally would. And then I had, a lot of vehicles will have like these little covers. I just trimmed out a little spot here to cover that up nicely. So that is a third option. This one is significantly more expensive than I believe all of those combined. So if I was building out like the most EMP proof vehicle ever, I'd probably combine all of this on one vehicle. But again, from the tests that I've seen and the studies that I've seen, vehicles will still fare pretty well, even in an E1 EMP attack. And I've done my due diligence on both vehicles to mitigate whatever unwanted energy enters their system, and I feel pretty good about that. Oh, but what about battery drain? Hey, that's a valid question. In fact, when we turn the camera off to, you know, get some water, because it's important and we're thirsty out here, Nick asked the exact same question, and the answer is, this has such an insignificant drain on your battery that it doesn't really matter. For example, if you were to leave your vehicle parked for a month, you didn't turn it on, nothing, this would drain less than 10% of your battery. So just know that there is some drain there, but it's relatively insignificant. So if I were to combine all of these devices onto one vehicle, I am mathematically over-prepared for an EMP. But this is still, we're still talking about an EMP, which is a very theoretical territory to a certain degree. There's only so much testing that can be done, and not a ton of testing has been done. But with these three different types of devices, you've mitigated in different ways the voltage pressure via a variety of methods. The traps use superfast TVS diodes for suppression. The high saturation ferrites use mixed oxide of iron and other metals to suppress and absorb too much energy. And the DEFCON uses metal oxide varistors, or MOVs, which clamp off too much voltage. Okay, if you're still watching this, listen, I know that was a ton of nerd stuff, a ton of data. It does not come naturally to me. It was very hard for me to understand a lot of this stuff, and I had to take copious amounts of notes, reading literally over 1,000 pages of documents, and it all sucks to read. The point here is this is a smart thing to consider. It is by no means, it should by no means be a priority over just the hard, simple truth of you're gonna need food, you should have water, you should have some backup power and fuel, you should have plenty of ammo, plenty of training, and most importantly, people around you that you can trust and rely on who are kind of the same mindset. That's the most important thing here. When you finally decide to get down into the EMP rabbit hole, this has just been a crash course. You can go much deeper, much more scientific, much more data driven. It gets wild. But when you're ready, now you know kind of where to start from. And that's why I wanted this video to be in the first place is, you know, if you had the time and energy to jump into this and learn as much as possible and figure out what your first step should be, now you have it. With that in mind, remember, I am not a scientist. I have stood on the shoulders of data and scientists and engineers to present this data to a broader audience in a fun way, hopefully, and hope that you guys have learned a lot and can plan accordingly and prioritize accordingly. With that being said, if you do want to find out more information on this stuff, we'll put some links in the description. Also, Dr. Arthur Bradley's channel is a phenomenal resource. Just a reminder to check him out, and his whole team over at his company is very responsive to emails and things like that. So thanks again, guys. We love y'all. We appreciate the support. Anything that you can do for us is much appreciated. We have Patreon. Those guys get first dibs to us in terms of our time and our energy and our responses and comments, because we got so many DMs, man. Like, I feel bad every day because I can't respond to all of them, but Patreon gets first dibs and early access to all of our content. We also have some pretty sweet merch and some items like blades, slings, things like that on our website. All of that supports us, and always, you know, commenting and sharing, destroying the algorithm, bypassing the algorithm that is trying to suppress us. I'm about to turn to Alex Jones. We appreciate all of it. So thank you guys, and we will catch you next week for a pretty cool video.
Oh, electric bikes? Yeah, they're dead once a sick
Certain kind of person that makes a point to leave a comment on any YouTube video that
What do you want me to say?